Uh, I believe we have enough people there. Hello, Tripti garu.
Good evening, sir.
మీరు సార్ అంటారని భయపడి ముందే తృప్తి గారు అన్న. So, Tripti, you are relatively new to me, although you have been on similar panels talking about, as an anesthesiologist, ventilation, oxygenation, etc. And Dr. Sudhakar had told me you had participated in a previous symposium. And I believe Dr. Prem Kumar said he will also be available. So what we would like to do today, for you to make your prepared remarks first from everything that you've been learning and what you would like to tell this audience. But as has been happening in the last 10 days or so, to devote more time for direct questions and answers as to what you would advise if you were at that bedside for this patient that is coming from, for example, I always pick Dr. Mallesh Rao as the example. He's away from Visakhapatnam in a rural hospital. So proceed when you're ready. You are currently an assistant or associate professor in Department of Anesthesiology at Andhra Medical College, correct?
Sir, I am an assistant professor here in the Department of Andhra Medical College, past 5 years.
Are you getting close to an associate professor or not yet?
I hope so.
Well, we'll help you to accelerate that process.
Thank you so much.
You can begin when you're ready.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Khairam, Dr. Budraju. Prem Kumar here.
Yes. Well, we are very glad that you are not too tired and are available there. Thank you.
Actually, I had a talk, rather discussion with Dr. Tripti Eramelli, what to do and how to go about it. Actually, Dr. Khairam, today you have to bear with us. You have enough number of sessions for, to meet everything, every aspect of what the audience need. And today, basically, what Tripti is going to do is, she will walk us through all the fundamentals or basics of oxygen administration. So might take quite a long, but actually she had two talks. We have divided into two. One is today the basic oxygen therapy, how it will be delivered, what are all the various kinds of devices, how to use them and all. She will be introducing and walk us through. And another day, she will be introducing us about NIV, invasive mechanical ventilation, the strategies and all on another day. And today what I thought and I believe that today's class is important. She has done for a lot of districts and, but that was in the government setup. All the PHC, CHC doctors they listen to, but not the doctors in the private sector. Everyone knows it. Probably they learned in their house surgeon days, but it is just an attempt to brush up our basics. So that's what it is from Tripti today. Is it not, Tripti?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the introduction by you. Today, basically, I'm going to talk about how we are going to deliver oxygen at the grassroots level in India. So what we do here at India, I'm going to talk about. And before all this, first of all, good evening to everybody in the US and a very good morning to all here in India. Come 2021, we all know that we've had our own set of challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic. And what was actually overwhelming for us was the huge scarcity in oxygen. We all know oxygen is priceless, but here in India, see that there was a huge gap between the demand and supply. That's when I think we all started, using ways and means as to how do we judiciously use oxygen, something which is so priceless, so, I can say it is one of the most essential therapeutic drugs for people, for the patients in COVID-19. So today I'm going to talk about how do we judiciously use oxygen, first thing. Secondly, what are the various oxygen delivery devices that we use here at grassroots level in India? And also, we're going to see how each device basically is different and which patient is more suited for a particular oxygen delivery device. Like one mask does not fit all. So this we can say with the oxygen delivery devices. It is very important that we know the basics so we can actually pick and choose which patient we need to keep which device. So without much delay, I would rather straight go into the topic. So these regarding oxygen delivery devices, the first thing which I would like to say is you choose an oxygen delivery device based on the compatibility of the patient. The most important thing is you need to see how compatible a patient is while on a particular oxygen device. Secondly is, are you meeting the therapeutic goal? It is very important that you choose the right device. At the same time, you also have to meet your therapeutic goal of the patient. So firstly, I would start with like I've already said, it is an essential drug and it is the mainstay in the management of moderate to severe cases of COVID-19. And the need of the hour, the hot topic of discussion is how do we rationally use oxygen and how do we manage this oxygen in moderate and severe cases of COVID-19. So when do we use oxygen? This is the question at the grassroots level. Everybody should know that when do we give oxygen to a patient? Most important thing is whenever you see an SpO2, that is on a pulse oximeter, if you see a saturation below 93, and or if you take an ABG, which is the arterial blood gas analysis of a patient, and it shows hypoxemia. So an ABG, just for info, is a blood sample taken from most preferably from the radial artery. And when you subject this arterial blood, we all know that arteries are the vessels which carry oxygenated blood in the body. So when you subject this arterial blood for analysis, you get a partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. So if this PaO2 value or the partial pressure of oxygen is less than 65 millimeters of mercury, it indicates that there is a certain amount of cellular hypoxia occurring in the cells. And if this hypoxia, you prolong it and you don't give oxygen, therapeutic oxygen at that point of time, it is going to cause irreversible damage to the organs. And what do we do by giving oxygen? When you give oxygen therapy to a patient, obviously it's going to increase the alveolar oxygen tension and it is going to relieve the work of breathing and also the myocardial work. So that is the indication for starting oxygen. One is your SpO2 when it is low, below 93 or 90. And the second one is when you have an ABG with hypoxemia. So first I would like to demonstrate the oxygen cylinder which we have. So as you can see, this is the oxygen cylinder, and this oxygen cylinder comes in various sizes and shapes. If you can see this oxygen cylinder, it has a black body. Each cylinder is color coded in the sense an oxygen cylinder has a code, which is if you see a black body and a white shoulder, it means that this cylinder carries oxygen. This oxygen which is stored in the cylinder is in gaseous form and it is stored under very high pressure. So you can actually store more amount of oxygen. To this oxygen cylinder, you have a pressure regulating valve which is attached, and this pressure regulating valve, what it does is the oxygen which is coming from the cylinder, it reduces the pressure so that it does not cause any kind of barotrauma to the patient. How do we open the oxygen cylinder? You can see a valve. Okay, you can see a valve, and when you turn it anti-clockwise direction, you can see the oxygen cylinder is open. Just turn it gently in anti-clockwise direction and you can see the cylinder opening. And this cylinder is connected to the flow meter. The flow meter, this is the flow meter, and this flow meter is calibrated with markings where you can see the amount of flow of oxygen being delivered to the patient, and along with this you can see a humidifier. We all know that oxygen is a dry gas, and it is indeed important that we humidify the gas before delivering it to the patient. So you can see the humidifier. An important thing to remember with the humidifier is please use distilled water or RO purified water. I'll talk about it again. So this is how we humidify oxygen before giving to the patient. And here you can see a connector to the flow meter by which we can actually deliver oxygen to the patient. And as you can all see, the oxygen is not put on the ground directly. It is placed inside a carrier, a special carrier. Please note that every oxygen cylinder should always have this carrier for transport. Some common tips which I would like to give before using the oxygen cylinder is, it is imperative, it is very important that oxygen cylinders should be handled only by trained personnel. Only persons who are trained in using an oxygen cylinder only should handle it. Second thing, you're not supposed to roll, drag, drop, slid the oxygen cylinder even for short duration, even for short distances. You know, it can cause fires. Third thing, always store oxygen cylinders in a place where it is neither too hot nor too cold. Extremes of temperatures not allowed. And always see to it that the place where you store these oxygen cylinders are well ventilated, just in case, you know, if you have any kind of leaks, it will dissipate because of the ventilation. And coming to the cylinders per se, there should not be any kind of flames or sparks near the cylinder. See to it that nobody smokes near the cylinders. And the cylinders, the fittings, like, you know, the regulators, the hose pipes, the pressure valves, they should all be compatible with the cylinder. You are not supposed to use some other gases regulator with this cylinder, so they should be compatible. Another thing is the hose pipe which delivers the oxygen. See to it that it does not have any kind of leaks for obvious reasons. And the most important thing is, whenever you are not using the oxygen cylinder, it is important that you close the valve. Always the cylinder, always stop the valve when not in use. Never try to repair the cylinder by itself. Always contact the dealer. Another tip is, I have seen people applying grease or oil to the valve so that you can actually slide it smoothly. That is totally a no-no, because these grease and oil can actually cause combustion. Absolutely contraindicated. And don't try to repaint your cylinder. And finally, never remove any kind of tags from your cylinder. So your cylinder basically is there only for your use. All you have to do is, you have to just use it and close it when you're not using. Everything else has to be taken care by the dealer or manufacturer. So that is about the oxygen cylinder just per se. And like we have seen, I have already said that there are different sizes of the oxygen cylinders. We have size A, which is the smallest cylinder, and the size J, which is the largest one. So here you can see the different sizes of oxygen cylinders, which is C, which has a capacity of 170 liters of oxygen, the D type of cylinder. The D type of cylinder we commonly use in the operation theaters. The E type of cylinder we commonly use while transporting a patient for resuscitation purposes, and it has got a capacity of 680 liters. One thing which I would like to tell everybody is, I've been asked this question many times, doctor, how do we calculate like which cylinder is going to last for how long a duration? So for this, I would like to show you that you can actually calculate the amount of time which the cylinder can come by looking at the pressure gauge. Like, hold this good. So you can see the pressure gauge. This pressure gauge is directly related to the amount of oxygen that is present in the cylinder. And if you can calculate the percentage of the gauge, for example, there is the gauge is showing you 50% full. Then it means that, for example, you have an E-type of cylinder which is 50% full. It means that it has got 340 liters left. It has got 340 liters left in the cylinder. And if you're using oxygen, say, for about 2 liters per minute, then you can calculate 2 liters per minute as in 2 into 60 per hour, minutes per hour, that is equivalent to 120 liters. And it is going to last you for about 2 to 3 hours. So that is how you need to calculate the amount of oxygen that is that will last for a particular cylinder. So let me tell you. So this is again here a pictorial depiction of how the oxygen cylinder is. So you can see this is the pressure regulatory valve. This is the gauge where you can actually see that directly the amount of oxygen that is present in the cylinder. Here you have the flow meter. So here you have the flow meter, which will show you the amount of oxygen. And here you have the humidifier. Now coming to the humidifier, we are all staring at this epidemic of mucormycosis. So it is also important to know that how do we use this humidifying cup? The thing to see is this humidifier should always be filled with distilled water or RO purified water. You're not supposed to use boiled water or tap water for the same purpose. It is important that you daily change the water in the humidifier. And secondly, daily you should be cleaning the humidifier with soapy water. And at least once a week, it is important that you soak this humidifier cup in an purifying the solution for at least half an hour for continuous use. So this is about the oxygen. The second thing is, when it comes to huge hospitals like KGH, we have liquid oxygen tanks. So these liquid oxygen tanks, they cater to large hospitals where you can have huge amounts of, where the requirement is basically huge. The demand is huge. So liquid oxygen, because they can actually contain a lot amount of oxygen. So if you see the liquid oxygen, they're situated at ground level. They are situated at the ground level. And that is because, they have to be continuously accessible by the trucks which supply. So as to not break the supply chain, they have to be easily accessible. And like I have told you, a liquid oxygen can store more amount of oxygen, which is almost about 860 liters of oxygen. So here you can see the liquid oxygen plant at KGH, which supplies. We have a dedicated team which continuously checks the amount of oxygen so as to see to it that the tanks are filled and the demand is met. So I've already told about who requires oxygen therapy. And if we see 100 cases, confirmed cases of COVID-19, it is important to note that 80% of them do not require oxygen. 17% of moderate disease would require hospitalization and non-ICU beds, and 3 of them would definitely require an ICU stay. And if you see for a case of a moderate case of COVID-19, where an SpO2 level is between 90 to 94%, the indicative flow rate is 2 to 4 liters per minute by a nasal prong, 5 to 10 liters by a face mask, and 10 to 15 liters by a non-rebreather mask. So this is for computation purposes. In moderate cases, we see about 50% of the beds for computation purposes, that is 8.5 would be considered for oxygen requirement in a hospital. And for severe cases where the SpO2 is less than 90%, it is important to note that here the oxygen delivery devices might not work, and you might have to go in for an invasive mechanical ventilator, which would use up to 10 liters of oxygen. And an NIV would use probably 25 to 60 liters of oxygen per minute. And an NRBM, when you use it for a step down, maybe 10 to 15 liters per minute. And for computation purposes, we take all the 3 beds for oxygen consumption in the ICU. So this, I want to focus on this very important point, that the target SpO2 level for a COVID-19 patient should be 94 to 95%. It is important that your COVID patient has a saturation between 94 to 95. It is not necessary that your patient needs to have a saturation of 99. Okay, so the target oxygen saturation by any oxygen delivery device should be only 94 to 95%. So the important thing is, once you cross this 95%, it may not provide any kind of additional benefit to the patient. So like I've already told you, today's main topic of discussion is the oxygen therapy devices. And like I've already said, these devices are, each patient is different, and we need to pick and choose. Today, I'm going to talk about which patient which device would actually suit which patient. And also, after using this device, is the therapeutic goal met or not? So that is the main crux of today's topic. So these oxygen therapy devices that differentiated based on the performance, total flows, capacity, and also patient dependency. So what we can you can remember is, there are low performance devices and high performance devices. So a low performance devices, it can only provide certain kind of FiO2 to the patient, not complete oxygenation demand. And a high performance device will actually cater to 100%, oxygenation demand. So that is about the differentiation or classification of an oxygen therapy device. So the first device which I would like to discuss today is the nasal cannula. So as you can all see, this is a nasal cannula, and this device is low weight. You can see it is very lightweight. It is made up of plastic, and it is also very low cost. The important thing to remember is, it is one of the most commonly used devices in hospital at grassroots level in India. So with the nasal mask, first I would like to show you how do we use this. So this nasal mask, you can use, these prongs you can see should be inserted into the nares of the patient. You can see we introduce this into the nares of the patient, and you can either fix it behind or you can have it fixed in the front like a chin lariat system. So who are the patients in whom you're going to use these nasal prongs? Most importantly, a choice of patient is very important. The first thing is, these nasal prongs should only be used in patients with stable breathing patterns. Stable breathing patterns as in, the patient is hypoxic, say 90% saturation, but he is not tachypneic. His respiratory rate is normal, and in the very early stages of ARDS maybe. That is when you use nasal prongs. Another prerequisite is, when you're using a nasal prong, it is important that the patient does not have any kind of nasal obstruction or a deviated nasal septum or any kind of epistaxis or any nasal problem. So these are the 2 prerequisites for using a nasal prong. Now I would like to show you the advantages. Like I've told you, it is the most common device which we use here in stable breathing patterns. As you can see, because it is inserted inside the nares and it is not covering the mouth of the patient can actually speak freely. The patient can eat and drink. The patient can, brush his teeth. The patient can read a book without much obstruction. The patient can wear his glasses. So these are all the basic comforts which a nasal cannula offers. So those are the comforts. And coming to the flow rate, it is very important, and this I'm stressing. The nasal cannula should use a flow rates of only 2 to 4 liters per minute. It is important that you use 2 to 4 liters per minute, because what happens is when you use flows above 4 liters, it's not going to do any good to the patient. First thing, the increased flow rate of about 5 or more than 6 liters, it's going to the jet of air which goes into the nose. It is going to cause drying and crusting of the nasal mucosa. First thing. Second thing is, even it's a low performance device. It's important to remember that it is a low performance device. So even if you increase the flow rate, it is not going to improve the oxygenation of the patient. Thirdly, you're going to actually waste oxygen. So I have seen people using 5 to 10 liters or 6 to 10 liters via nasal cannula. So that is not recommended. 2 to 4 liters is prudent to be used by a nasal cannula, and it is very comfortable when you use 2 to 4 liters. It can provide an FiO2 of 0.3 to 0.4 when used by a stable patient. So that is about nasal cannula. Another thing to remember is, with the nasal cannula, you can have pediatric and adult sizes. Remember to choose appropriate size. A disadvantage of the nasal cannula is sometimes it can dislodge easily. It can easily get dislodged. So that is one drawback of the nasal cannula. Otherwise, it is a very good device, comfortable device for most of the patients. So let us see, like I've already said, it is inexpensive, easy to apply. Anybody can apply. A layman can also apply. It is very comfortable and well tolerated. The disadvantages I've already mentioned. With high flows, you're going to cause nasal crusting and irritation. Important to have appropriate sized cannula, and you can actually have displacement. Dislodgement is a common problem with the nasal cannula. And an extension of the nasal cannula is the nasal catheter. Like you can see, the only difference is it is a bit more difficult to insert a nasal catheter. It is also low cost and good stable. The difference between a nasal catheter and a nasal cannula is the stability. You provide better stability to the patient. And disadvantage being it is difficult to insert, and same, you cannot use it in people who have deviated nasal septums or obstructions, and because of the jet of air inside the nasopharynx, it can cause additional problems of gagging, air swallowing, or aspiration. So that is about the nasal catheters and nasal devices. Let's go to a medium capacity device, and the medium capacity device is the simple face mask or the Hudson mask. You can see this is also a lightweight oxygen delivery device. It is made up of plastic. It is also low cost, and this device basically has a capacity of 100 to 300 ml of air, and it covers the nose and the mouth. If you can see this, it has also got a metal rim which you can pinch to have a better grip over the nose. So, and also a elastic headband which you can place at the behind the patient for tighter grip. So this is about the face mask, and it has, just like the nasal cannula, it has a soft tubing which can be connected to the flow meter. Of the oxygen cylinder, and oxygen can be delivered. Now, when do you use the face mask? So again, the question is, why do we use and when do we use a face mask? Just like the nasal cannula, a face mask is also a low performance device. That is, you can use the face mask only in stable breathing patterns, where the patient is desaturating, where the SpO2 is about 90%, 88%, but at the same time, there is no tachypnea. The patient is stable. Only then you use nasal face mask. And also, I have mentioned in patients who have any kind of nasal problems, those who cannot use nasal prongs, for example, with deviated nasal septum and obstructions, those are the candidates in whom you can use a face mask. Like you can see, it can cover the nose and the mouth. An important tip regarding the face mask is, when you're using a face mask, it's important that your flows should be around 5 liters, minimum 5 liters, because if you're using flows below 5 liters, it is going to cause rebreathing of the exhaled gases. I have seen people who have been using extremes of flows for the face mask. There is no point of using gas flows above 10 liters for a face mask, because that is it being a low performance device. It is not going to improve the oxygenation. It's going to cause wastage. At the same time, I have seen patients, while they're improving on an oxygen device, they are reducing the flow below 5 liters for a face mask. So once you reduce 5 liters, below 5 liters, it is going to cause rebreathing and only worsen the patient because of the increased work in breathing. So that's about face mask. Use only in stable breathing patterns, in those whom you cannot use nasal prongs. A little bit better, because it can deliver better FiO2 of say maybe 0.3 to 0.5 compared to the nasal mask. So those are the advantages. The disadvantages being, any device when it is covering up your nose and mouth can be claustrophobic for the patient. The patient will not be able to tolerate devices covering your face and mouth for a prolonged period of time. So it is cumbersome, or rather bothersome, for the patient to keep on removing the mask while speaking or eating. Also, when the patient is violently coughing out, you can see the phlegm inside the mask, which can be bothersome for the patient. Also, like I've said, it cannot be used in unstable patients where you have the risk of vomiting or aspiration. So that is about the face mask. Another extension of the face mask is, okay, let me see. Regarding the face mask, the advantages are, like I've already said, it is very easy to apply. Anybody can use a face mask. It's very simple to apply to the patient. It is useful in patients who have nasal problems, and the disadvantages, like I've said, it can be uncomfortable when you use it for long periods of time. The flow is less, it can cause rebreathing. An extension of the face mask is a reservoir bag, NRBM mask, which is the non-rebreathing mask. You can see this is just like the face mask. The thing is, it has a reservoir bag attached to this. Now, what is the purpose of having this reservoir bag? So the purpose is, between the face mask and the reservoir bag is a unidirectional valve. So when the patient is exhaling oxygen, carbon dioxide, it is going out, but it is not coming into the device. This reservoir bag, in fact, delivers pure oxygen to the patient. So this device is usually used for those patients who are hypoxic, who are unstable, but who have stable breathing, who don't have excess amount of tachypnea. So those are the patients in which an NRBM mask can be used. By the inclusion of this reservoir, the FiO2 can be increased even to 90%. So that is the major advantage of the NRBM mask. How do we use an NRBM mask? It is just similar to the face mask. It is also a plastic device. It is lightweight in color. It is low cost, and it has got an elastic rim which you can actually fix behind the patient. So that is regarding the description of an NRBM mask. Now coming to the utilization. When do you use a high this NRBM mask. You use it basically, like I have said, when a patient is hypoxic, but only for short duration, because this NRBM mask, when you're using it, you're not supposed to use humidification. So when you're not using humidification, what it can cause is, it will cause drying up of the mucosa. Like we all know, when there is no humidification, it will cause drying up of the mucosa. And you might ask me, why are you not humidifying going to use a humidifier for an NRBM mask? That is because if you use a humidifier, it is going to cause condensation of droplets inside the bag, and it will cause stiffness of the bag, and the bag will not be able to expand properly. Another important tip which I would like to give is, when using the NRBM mask, it is important that the bag of the reservoir bag is always inflated. It should always be full. And how do you keep it full? You can always keep it full by using high flows of oxygen, about 10 to 15 liters per minute. That is how you are going to keep an NRBM mask, the bag inflated at all the times. So please remember that you're not supposed to use humidification. Because you're not using humidification, you cannot use this mask for days on together. It is most useful when you're transporting a patient for for the need of an NIV or a ventilator. So only for those patients who are severely hypoxic and who are in need of ventilator, you can use these. At the same time, you can also use them while maybe stepping down from the ICU for short periods of time before shift them to a normal face mask or a nasal prongs. So that is when your NRBM mask is going to come into use. So you can see these are the exhalation ports, and from here the oxygen goes, and the reservoir bag is only able to give you pure FiO2. And with a flow rates of say 10 to 15 liters per minute, you can also provide an FiO2 of greater than 60 to 90% of oxygen. So till now we have seen low performance devices. Now we are going to see a fixed performance device, which is the Venturi mask. So like you can see, this is the Venturi mask. This is also made up of plastic, and it is just like the face mask, and it has all the contents of the face mask, like the elastic, the metal rim, and the holes on both sides of the mask. And it has, the important thing is, it has got a diluter jet. Like you can see, this is a color-coded diluter jet, and it has got holes around this diluter jet. So this works on the Bernoulli principle or the Venturi principle, which states that whenever high flow of gas passes through a narrow chamber, like the holes in the diluter jet, it causes a decrease or negative pressure, and this negative pressure in turn sucks the atmospheric air, diluting the jet. So here I'm going to show you different colored jets. You can see in my hand, you can see different colored jets, and all these jets have got the amount of FiO2 or the amount of FiO2 and the flow in liters to be given. So this is about Venturi mask, where you can fix the amount of oxygen and the amount of FiO2 you want to deliver it to the patient. And where is it most useful? Like I have said, they are color coded. If you're using a blue color Venturi, you can deliver up to 24% FiO2 with 2 liters of oxygen. And with an orange, you can say 6 liters will give you 31%. A green with 15 liters will give you an FiO2 of 60% oxygen. So this is about a Venturi mask, and it is very useful in COPD patients, where you need to give the perfect like FiO2 to the patient for breathing. An important tip is, when you're using a Venturi mask, it can also be claustrophobic because it's covering the mouth. Second thing is, it's important that the patient does not put his, cover the diluter jet with his bed sheet, because then the very purpose of the Venturi is lost. So see to it that nothing is covering the Venturi diluter jet. And this is also a fixed performance device, and you can use different colors as shown here. This is also having a soft tubing which you can connect to the wall mount or an oxygen cylinder, and you can use the flows. It's very easy to use. Even this device can also be used by anybody. It's easy to use at grassroots level. So that is about the Venturi mask. So like I have already said, the nasal cannula can deliver up to 2 to 4 liters and up to 22 to 40% FiO2. A simple Hudson mask or the oxygen mask, 5 to 10 liters and 40 to 60 FiO2 per minute. A Venturi mask, variable depending on the color, non-rebreather would give you 90% FiO2 with probably 15 liters of oxygen, and NIV with 60 liters or 45 to 60 liters of flow, it can probably deliver 22 to 60% FiO2. So in India, we've been having, I can say we have made an innovation in India, which is the NIV Bains. You can say the great Indian Jugaad. This is kind of, an innovation which we have done in India. It's very interesting, which I would like to show you all. So this is the humble Bains circuit or the coaxial circuit which we use in our anesthesia practice to deliver oxygen to the patient. So what we have done is we have combined this Bains circuit along with an NIV mask with an NIV mask. Okay, there the connector is missing, but we have connected the Bains circuit with an NIV mask, and this we have, I'll show you how do we apply to the patient. So the elastic band is missing. It is just like how you apply your regular NIV to the patient, and your Bains circuit is connected to the NIV, and this Bains circuit has got a plastic tubing which you can attach to the oxygen port on the wall or to the cylinder. Okay, so once you attach this to the oxygen cylinder or port, you can increase the flow. Please remember that the flow you can increase up to 15 liters per minute. This Bains circuit has got a reservoir bank, and it has got an APL valve, which is the adjustable pressure limiting valve. You know, you can see you can open and close this valve smoothly. So when you open and close this valve, the beauty of this device is when you partially close it, you can actually deliver PEEP to the patient. You can actually deliver PEEP to the patient. So where do we use this mask? So first thing is, you need not have trained personnel to use this mask. Like I've told you, it's very simple. All you have to do is connect your Bains circuit to the NIV mask and put the port to an oxygen delivery to the wall mount or oxygen cylinder. Okay, and just fix the mask to the face of the patient. What it is going to do is, you're going to adjust the valve, it is going to give PEEP to the patient, and this mask actually works better than the NRBM mask. So it can be used at grassroots level by an untrained about anybody. You don't need a qualified person to use this. Whenever there is a need for NIV and NIV is not immediately available, you can use this device for a couple of hours before the patient, gets NIV. The second advantage which we have noticed with this is the oxygen consumption by this circuit, by this device, is only 15 liters when compared to an NIV. This bag will provide the PEEP for the patient. So in a way, it helps achieving 100% FiO2 also to the patient. And what we have noticed is we have used this, we have been using this past few months, a couple of months in our ICU, past few weeks in fact, the ICU, and we have seen patients have been reporting more comfort with this device. I have seen saturations of about 85% coming up to 96, 97 by using the Baines NIV machine, along with proning of the patient. When you do a combination of proning and using the Baines NIV machine, the Baines NIV circuit, I have seen oxygenation levels improve in a patient. Now you can see there is, you can say that maybe there is a question of hypercarbia in the patient because you are going to close the APL valve. So the important thing to notice is you should not completely close the APL valve. You should keep it partially open. You should keep it partially open and maybe routinely take ABG samples thrice a day or so to see if there is no hypercarbia. So that is one thing which we have been using in our setup. So it is economical.
Dr.
Yes, sir.
Tripti,
Yes, sir.
if you could pause for a moment,
Yes, sir.
given the nature of our audience.
Yes, sir.
So far, you have done a beautiful job of going from a simple cannula or a prong in the nostrils all the way to NIV Baines. Beyond that, generally, you would require ICU graded higher ventilation to the respirator. So I would like you to pause at this moment because you have done your charge of the simpler and more complex oxygen delivery systems. But I must be mindful of how much time they will stay there to listen. So what we will do, if you don't mind,
Sure.
you might want to take questions at the end about more complex delivery methods. But for now, I believe you have reached a stage of getting them all the way up to this point, especially now that there are so many doctors who are not regular hospital-based physicians that deliver intensive care that are trying to do things in their limited resources. So you've done a wonderful job of bringing us up to NIV Baines. At this point, you might cut it and we'll go back to questions. So with that in mind, you might want to take another 60 seconds to close your method of delivering this lecture.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So what I meant was, do you have something else to say before we go on to take questions and answers, or we'll bring you back again? Because I think if the country does not solve this problem, there will still be questions about how to deliver the oxygen after we have found sources of oxygen in the next 1 or 2 months. So we'll be calling you back
Thank
to
you,
talk
sir.
to our crowd. But you might want to stop at this moment and we will take questions from the audience, okay?
Sir, absolutely, as you wish.
Dr. Prem Kumar, you agree with the plan?
Yeah, actually, if you allow her 2 minutes, I think she can finish off her HFNO. That would be the end of the lecture. So
I will definitely wait for 2 more minutes. Please do, please do. Forgive my interruption.
Okay, sir.
ahead.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I would just finish off with 2 minutes, the HFNO. So this is the Baines, which I've been talking about, the Baines and the NIV. Now coming to the HFNO. This is one video which I wanted to show everybody as to how we connect the Baines and NIV. If you have time at the end of the session, probably I would like to show you how we have done and how the patient is improving on an NIV Baines. But cutting it short, so this is the setup, basically the setup of the high flow nasal cannula. So like you can see, it has got, it needs a generator, an air oxygen blender, and I'm so sorry, there is no HFNO cannula with us, but it is similar to the nasal prongs. Only thing is, it is more softer than the nasal prongs. It is more white bore. It is made up of silicone, just like the nasal prongs. It fits into the nares, and it has an elastic rim which you can tie to the patient. And this nasal cannula is connected to the tubing of the HFNO. So the very purpose of the HFNO, like you can see, the name itself suggests high flow. It is a high flow nasal oxygen device. Okay, so with this high flow nasal oxygen device, what you can do is you can deliver 100% of FiO2 with liters, with the flow rate of ranging from 20 liters to almost 100 liters in some devices. So this is regarding the high flow nasal cannula. The important thing being, where do you use them? So a HFNO cannula is basically used in unstable breathing patterns where the patient is tachypneic, the patient has low oxygen saturation. So when he comes to the hospital with tachypnea and low saturation, you can start the patient with directly on HFNO, high flow nasal cannula. The important principle being, when you're using high flows as much as 40 to 60 liters per minute, what it can do is, it will firstly cause the clearance of the mucociliary, it will enhance the mucociliary action, it will clear the secretions, and because of the high flow, what it is going to do is, it is going to dislodge the carbon dioxide which is present in the alveoli with oxygen, and it is going to increase the FRC of the patient, thereby it relieves, that is how it actually relieves the hypoxia of the patient. So there are three parameters. I'm going to finish it quickly. So there are three parameters which are, keep in mind, they're independent parameters which you can put when the patient comes to you in a HFNO. The first thing being the temperature. Generally, the ambient temperature of 37 degrees is appropriate. And like I have said, flow from ranging from 20 to 60 liters. In Airvo, we start using 60 liters. Per minute. Some machines also have 100 liters. You have specified devices which can deliver HFNO, like the Airvo 2, which we have here at KGH, King George Hospital. And you also have a mode known as oxygen delivery in most of the ventilators, by which you can use the HFNO filter. So these are high flow humidified oxygen, and you can independently, you can set the parameters of temperature, flow, and FiO2 depending on the patient's condition. If the patient is unstable, you can start directly with high flows of 100% FiO2 or 60 liters per minute, and gradually taper down as the patient begins to come to normal stable patterns. And when in spite of giving 100% full flow and high FiO2s, if the patient is still tachypneic, that is the time when we take the crucial decision of switching over the patient from a HFNO to an NIV maybe. So this is calculating oxygen requirement, but I guess I will cut this short, and we can go into discussion, sir.
Okay.
So that's about it. Thank you.
Very good. That is actually extremely informative, especially for those people who are not actually experienced in severe acute care situations on ICUs. For example, Dr. Manoj Patruni and Dr. Vijay Sekhar are running I don't know if they're running, they're in charge of a large unit. Not all of their patients can have access to ICU level specialists, but the escalation of various methods of oxygen delivery all the way to where you ended is extremely helpful for this population of doctors who are not used to running such intervention. So to hear that from an anesthesiologist is very timely. Thank you very much. You did a very good job.
Thank you, sir.
So I will look at a couple of questions that are already on the chat box and then invite questions. Let's see. If a patient is on high flow nasal cannula for a week time or NIV, how much amount of lung injury is possible? I'm almost tempted to answer this, but this is for you.
Pardon me, sir. Can you just repeat the question?
If a patient has been on high flow nasal oxygen for 1 week, how much lung injury can he sustain? In other words,
Sir, we don't, there is a possibility of pneumothorax, remote possibility, but it generally depends upon the patient's underlying, pathology rather than HFNC or NIV. Mostly the thing is, if you're using prolonged periods of high flow oxygen with with high flow oxygen and more amount of FiO2 for prolonged period of time, it might cause oxygen toxicity, as we all know. And the second thing is oxygen dependency. If you're not tapering the patient or you're not weaning off the patient at appropriate times, it can cause maybe dependency. That is one thing. And because if you're not adjusting the pressures, and it can cause some amount of barotrauma maybe in an NIV. So I don't think so. We can actually calculate the amount of lung injury in a patient by using these devices. It is mainly the patient's inherent lung condition which is going to cause the damage.
Can
so
I
unless
Dr.
there is-
Kairam?
Yes, of course, please.
The question is relevant because we are seeing quite a few number of cases of pneumothorax here and even in Srikakulam, even WIMS we have seen last year. So as she said, it is intrinsic to the lung. If the patient is a COPD patient who is having subpleural blebs, or if there is any interstitial lung disease, who the patient, till then we don't know, but at that moment. And for the barotrauma to see, there is a simple calculation in high flow nasal cannula. For every 10 liters of flow, it will generate 1 centimeter CPAP. So if you are delivering 60 liters, that means 6 centimeters. For every 10, 1 PEEP. So 60 flow means 6 PEEP. 6 PEEP is not that great to cause a barotrauma. So we are using in our invasive mechanical ventilation up to 15, sometimes 18 like that. So 6 PEEP with a high flow nasal cannula is not at all a big PEEP, doesn't cause any barotrauma. But whatever that happens due to the intrinsic lung condition. That's what I mean to say.
Okay, that's a good answer. In other words, the instruments themselves, the devices themselves, do not deliver it in such a way to cause lung trauma because of the devices. So it is heavily dependent on underlying lung disease. Okay. Dr. Kallepalli says pneumothorax and surgical emphysema reported with NIV on high pressures. So we are on the same theme, right?
Yeah.
So because the pneumothorax and surgical emphysema, it implies that the lung itself is already in trouble, not just the NIV causing the rupture, correct?
Yeah, pneumothorax, pneumomediastinum, surgical emphysema, that is subcutaneous emphysema, all are indicative of barotrauma. That means something is happening to the lungs, high pressure is delivered, and some marginal alveoli are getting ruptured, leading to this air leak. Okay. So why the alveoli are rupturing? Either we are delivering a very, very high pressure inadvertently, or if there is an intrinsic lung disease, as I said, subvisceral pleural blebs on the mediastinal aspect or on the parietal aspect. Sometimes when you are applying the NIV with high pressures, like 16/6, or some people go high about 20/8 like that, high pressures. And if the patient coughs against the ventilate NIV pressures, that will add on to it. So it's like that. Not in every patient that happens.
Dr. Buddharazu made a comment. He liked the presentation being very practical and informative, and he liked the demonstrations on oxygen delivery. But he now has a question. Go ahead, Venkat.
Yeah, so maybe Prem can answer this question. So when we're delivering high flow oxygen, especially exceeding 20-30 liters per minute, and also with NIVs, some of these people, especially people who have chronic airway disease or reactive airway disease, there's probably a higher incidence of auto peeping, and probably they're elevating their positive end expiratory pressures because of lack of time to expire, right? Maybe that's contributing to some of these barotrauma-like events. Prem or even Dr. Tripti might be able to answer that.
Please mute. Please mute.
Please. Yeah, I'll tell you. Dr. Budraju, when a patient is breathing at a very rapid rate, okay, say 30 per minute, so the cycle duration of respiratory cycle will be 60/30, that is 2 seconds. Then the IE ratio, if you divide it into 1:2, the expiratory time will be very less. So as the respiratory rate increases, the expiratory time will be less. So more and more amount of air will be left inside before the next breath is delivered. So that is what we call it as a dynamic hyperinflation, and leading to some amount of autopay inside. That adds to that. And in COPD patients, already there is bronchospasm, that is the airway narrowing. So it also obstructs in emptying the airways in the short expiratory time. So if you have a invasive mechanical ventilation where we have the control of breathing of the patient by giving deep sedation or paralysis, we can take the control by reducing the respiratory rate, by increasing the E time, IE ratio, expiratory time more. We can do that. But here in NIV and HFNO, the patient is spontaneously breathing. The respiratory rate is his own, whether he is breathing on 30 or 35, and we are delivering above with the HFNO or NIV, the pressures as well as the flows. That could be that is the reason actually. We are unable to control the rates, so expiratory time will be automatically reduced. So there will be dynamic hyperinflation and autopeak.
Yeah, Tripti, I have a small suggestion. Tripti, are you there?
Yes.
Tripti, you are muted, Tripti.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Tripti, no, you know that we have many of the house agents and the final year students in this group, and they are listening to you. And you assume that they all know about the FiO2 and all. Please explain them as to how the oxygen is delivered and how the FiO2 is calculated.
So in the atmospheric air, we have about 21% of oxygen. So that is the basic oxygen we have in the atmosphere. Anything above it is the oxygen which is delivered by the oxygen cylinder or whatever source of oxygen we have. So 100% FiO2 means there is pure oxygen being delivered to the patient. Anything about 21 has to come from an oxygen delivery device. So that is how we calculate the fractional inspired oxygen concentration. That is the FiO2 for the patient.
Okay, Dr. Tripti, I'll explain them in a little different way. You catch some air in a balloon. So balloon is full of air. So what is air? Air is a mixture of so many gases, oxygen plus nitrogen plus carbon dioxide and all. So the percentage of oxygen, the fraction of oxygen that is present in the air in the balloon is fraction of inspired oxygen. For example, in air, oxygen will be 21%, nitrogen will be 78%, carbon dioxide will be 0.03%, like that. So in air, in a balloon, 21% only will be oxygen, remaining will be nitrogen. So that is what I make to understand, that is a fraction of oxygen in the air, 21%. That is fixed either on the earth or on the mountain or on the moon. So what does it differ? Only the barometric pressure. If you go high on a mountain or on the moon, the barometric pressure comes down into 21%. That will all come down. So you can say the fraction is, it's a fraction of the air. And as you said, whatever, if you want to give high flows, nothing is there in the air more than 21. So you have to add from an oxygen source, that is a cylinder or a wall source or anything like that. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Tripti, I have a question in the chat box. How long will you wait before escalating or de-escalating oxygen device and flow?
So it is very important that we actually see the clinical condition of the patient. If the patient is uncomfortable, if the patient is tachypneic, then we can escalate to the next device, or you can take an ABG. And if your partial pressure of oxygen is low or hypercarbia is there, or if there is any kind of instability in the patient, like falling vitals, unstable vitals, that's the time when we escalate. And de-escalate, it's also the same. When the patient is comfortable on a device with least amount of oxygen and achieving our goal, therapeutic goal of 94 or 95% of oxygen, that is the time we start weaning the patient. That is the time we start to de-escalate the oxygen device. So that is how we go about in our ICU.
And on that same topic, a couple of patients that I was trying to give advice, preparing the family for impending doom. I kept trying to explain to them about work of breathing, how as the disease gets severe and things get worse, how to explain to the bedside person or the local junior doctor to observe, report on work of breathing increasing before the guy crashes. Do you use that term regularly, and how do you tell that to the attendant staff, family?
Can I answer this, Dr. Kairam?
Yes.
Yeah. See, if a patient's pulse oximetry reading is monitored, and if it is 92 or 95%, just if you're banking on that figure, we are wrong. First of all, is it 95%? On which level of oxygen? Is it 2 liters? Is it 5 liters? Or is it on a HFNO? That is important. Second thing, it is a trend. Now it is 95%. After 1 hour or 2 hours on the same flow, same FiO2, how is his pulse? SpO2. That's why always ABGs or pulse oximetries, they're all, we have to observe the trend rather than in point in time. That moment he may be good by all compensations, like his accessory. Now you have asked for the work of breathing. Say patient's accessory muscles are acting. That means his sternocleidomastoids, the suprasternal notch is retracting, his intercostal muscles are acting, he is tachypneic. So that is the picture of a work of breathing. His abdominal muscles are drawing in. See, you can see patient is distressed. That's what we call it, the respiratory distress. Respiratory distress is nothing but his work of breathing is increased. Normally, if you observe, we are all breathing, but we don't realize that we are breathing. So smooth is the work of breathing because our lung is very compliant, very elastic. So we don't have to spend much energy on distending our lungs. Whereas in ARDS lung, the lung is stiff and it is very difficult to distend or inflate the lung. So we need to expend a lot of energy. That energy is by using accessory muscles. Here, actually the patient, all accessory muscles come into play, the sternocleidomastoids and rectus muscles and all those things, intercostal retraction and tachypnea. You can tell the house surgeon or the attendant that if this is happening, this is the work of breathing. So whatever oxygen we are giving, that is not supporting, and he might need higher levels of support. And another important thing here I want to say is, pulse oximetry will give you only the oxygenation status. Suppose if you are giving 10 liters of oxygen, and instead of the patient being improved, he is becoming drowsy and sleepy. What does it mean? Is he improving? This is the point. In COPD patients, if you give high flow of oxygen, his respiratory center is deprived of the hypoxic drive, and slowly he will be going in for hypoventilation, and his CO2 will be building up and leading to CO2 narcosis. And unfortunately, we don't have any device which, just like pulse oximetry, can measure the carbon dioxide. Of course, there are EtCO2s, transcutaneous CO2 monitors and all. That's not available for us. We have only pulse oximetry. So just looking at the pulse oximetry and getting satisfied that, oh, his saturation is 95, 96, that's great. That's not good. You have to look at his CO2 removal status. Clinically, if he is becoming drowsy, sleepy, suspect the CO2 narcosis in such case, and do an ABG and see what his CO2 level is. Okay, thank you.
I got that. This is a good question again for Tripti. With the brain circuit, partially closing the valve produces some PEEP. Would the circuit be efficient in preventing rebreathing in a spontaneously breathing patient?
Basically, the Baines NIV circuit should be used in a spontaneously breathing patient, sir. There is concern that it can cause hypercarbia. That's what I have said, that we should not completely close the APL valve. You should leave it partially open. So you're also giving sufficient amount of PEEP to the patient. At the same time, some amount of gas from the patient is also escaping outside. And the important thing is, with the Baines circuit, you have a tubing inside the circuit which will deliver only fresh glass flows. And another tip is, you should use a flow which is double the minute ventilation of the patient. For example, if the minute ventilation of a patient is 8 liters, you put a flow of 15 liters for the patient. So that will prevent rebreathing. Secondly, we can also start by doing an ABG analysis, where if you can see whether there is hypercarbia or not. And once in a while, maybe if the patient, if you feel that the patient is becoming drowsy or hypercarbic, you can actually remove the mask also, but I don't think so it will go to that extent. Most of the patients have been very comfortable using the Baines and IV circuit. I'm sure Prem Kumar sir will be able to also add in his experience with this.
Yeah, the Baines circuit has been used across India. A lot of centers are practicing it. And really, I like the design. As you said, the APL valve, if it's half closed, it will give some PEEP. Normally, what happens, one should understand the ARDS pathophysiology. Some of the alveoli are partially collapsed. Some of the alveoli are completely collapsed. Some alveoli are filled with inflammatory exudate. So even if you give oxygen with HFNO or even with our NRBM and all, it is not going to open up these alveoli, not going to drive the inflammatory exudate from the alveoli into the interstitial space. So what should we do? So at that moment, how much oxygen you give, the sats are not going to improve. So only thing is you have to apply the PEEP to open up the collapsed alveoli, to drive the fluid into the interstitial space and all those things. So PEEP is very, very important where high levels of oxygen are not improving its sats. So the PEEP, as you said, can be applied by HFNO gives PEEP, as I said, for every 10 liters, 1 centimeter, or a CPAP machine, or a BiPAP machine, or in this, your innovation, the APL half-closed valve can give some PEEP. And so far, so many people used across India and nobody commented about the CO2 retention. I also had a doubt, but there's clearly all the people record well. We can validate this. We can validate this in a way, like take 50 or 100 cases, baseline ABG PCO2, and after a few hours or a day, you repeat the PCO2, and if we come to know whether the CO2 is retaining or not, definitely it won't. And I discussed with another senior anesthesiologist, if you release the flow into the bag twice that of the minute volume of the patient, obviously it won't cause any CO2 rebreathing. Okay, so if the patient is breathing 400 ml into 30, that means 400 into 30 means 12 liters minute volume. So you just double it up. Anyway, our cylinders won't give more than 15 liters, but high flow other flow meters are there. We can increase up to 50. 15 is enough. A lot of people are trying 15 liters with this Baines circuit and nobody recorded this. And we can validate this by a small trial. I think Tripti will do that.
Yes, sir.
While we are all listening to both of you, Dr. Mallampalli made a couple of good comments. He rapidly put up a couple of references that lead to what Dr. Prem Kumar was saying. It's the intrinsic disease that matters the most. And if you have a pneumothorax, it is basically because of the subpleural air. It's a reflection of how bad the disease is. Dr. Mallampalli, would you like to speak, or I continue to read what you wrote?
So you can continue. Basically, it is COVID-19.
Your microphone is bad. You want to try again?
Hello?
Your microphone was bad. Could you try again, please?
Okay. Is it better now, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Okay. Yeah. I think, as you know, like most of the infiltrates from COVID-19 happen in the subpleural space. So it is mostly a peripheral infiltrate that happens. And I think there are multiple cases of reported of spontaneous pneumothorax, even when people who are not using high flow nasal cannula or any NIV or any PEEP. So I think the intrinsic disease is definitely puts at risk for pneumothorax, and using NIV on top of that can exacerbate the barotrauma on the lungs.
At the risk of sounding ignorant on pulmonary physiology, I would like to ask the experts, as this disease is escalating, inherent damage to the lung from COVID itself, that's going to cause us trouble with pneumothorax and further deterioration. Is there any radiological clue? Because I keep hearing about people asking for repeat CAT scan. Before having to move the patient to the CAT scan machine, is there any value for regular X-ray of the chest? Or you're only dependent on observing from the bedside the work of breathing, matching it with the oxygen concentration? In other words, X-ray is dead.
No, I got it. See, observing the patient at the bedside is enough. That's what I feel. See, as the patient's work of breathing is increasing, that means the lung compliance is reduced. Lung is becoming stiffer and stiffer. That's why he has to expend more and more amount of work to inflate his lungs. So obviously, when the patient is struggling and is struggling for breathing increasing, that means the lung is getting worse. If you want to take an X-ray, you can take an X-ray to see whether the shadows are progressing or not. But anyway, that doesn't help us in the management. Suppose if the X-ray shadows are increasing, what will you do? Are you going to increase your steroids? Are you going to do anything else? What we do is just looking at the patient, looking at the oxygen saturations or ABG, and you just alter your supportive measures. Suppose if the high flow HFNO is not sufficient to meet with his work of breathing. I'll tell you, work of breathing means tiring muscles. Tiring muscles, oxygen is not going to support. Then what is going to support? The pressure support. How do you give the pressure support? By choosing an NIV mode and a pressure support CPAP mode, or a portable BiPAP, where both EPAP, that is PEEP, and IPAP, that is a pressure support to the muscles, will be there, and that will support the tiring muscles. And anyway, if the patient is tachypneic and the disease is worse, one thing known as SILI, self-inflicted lung injury, because of very wide excursions, very wide transpulmonary pressures, that leads to injury. If a patient crashes or if the saturation is drastically falling, anyway, we will order an X-ray, because to see a pneumothorax, to see if lung is collapsed or something else, a pulmonary edema superimposed on it just because a myocarditis happened. So anyway, if a patient is crashing, his oxygen saturation is dropping, we support him at that moment, but we want to know the cause. Definitely we take an X-ray. Okay.
Thanks.
Sir, good morning, sir. Kumar, sir.
Good morning.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
man.
Sir, thank you, sir. Actually, X-ray does not give a clear picture, because CT scan gives either is a resolving phase or a increasing phase or a standing phase, can be a little bit understood by radiologists better than us. But we can understand it's a resolving phase, because the score may be 25 by 25, but still patient will be having a good oxygenation 98 without any support. So X-ray is actually misleading, because if the score is
Let me
25
tell you, Dr. Mohan, let me tell you, we are talking a situation of work of breathing, patient tiring and oxygen saturation dropping in an ICU, and I can't take a CT plant to the ICU room. And at the same time, I cannot give an unstable patient to the CT room. Anyway, everyone knows, even you and me know, that CT is better than X-ray as far as the clarity is concerned. Suppose if you see in the on the CT, okay, I'm talking in a different way. You see on the CT that score is worsening from 15 to 25 to 17 to 25. What you will do? Do you want to escalate the steroids?
No, sir, I don't escalate the steroids.
That's what I'm telling you. You look at the patient, his work of breathing, his oxygenation and CO2 patterns, and you support him. The support is by means of your, increasing the flows, or if you keep him on an NIV or you keep him on an invasive ventilator. That's what we do. For every change in intervention, we don't need to go for a CT. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, sir.
I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but because of Dr. Buddharazu.
Yeah, one final comment. Agree with Prem and Dr. Mohan Maharaj as well. At least in US, unless there's a significant obvious deterioration of oxygenation on a hospitalized patient, usually, imaging is not done just, for the sake of it. There has to be a significant change in the level of oxygenation or something big happening with the patient for them to prompt another imaging study, because the degree of what we find on the imaging studies really doesn't dictate what we do in terms of how we intervene with the patient. So the only reason to do imaging, for example, would be if you're suspecting a pulmonary embolism strongly, and then you want to confirm that event, because it would mean that you would want to escalate the anticoagulation to therapeutic doses. And, or if you're suspecting pneumothorax, for example, only when there's a dramatic change in the oxygenation status that you can't explain is when people are doing imaging studies here. Otherwise, imaging is notorious for not having clinical correlation in a lot of patients. You could have a score of 24 over 25 and still be on room air, and vice versa.
All right. I believe we have gotten a very good tutorial and lecture on how to escalate the oxygen delivery as the patient gets worse, and all the way to ventilation. And Dr. Prem Kumar, thank you for being there. Dr. Tripti, you did a great job for us.
Thank you, sir.
And please keep coming back, because most of the questions in the next few days are going to be on ventilation and this other awful plague we have called the black fungus. I think those two things have taken over the entire COVID story. Dr. Sudhakar, I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Kairam, for organizing as well as moderating the entire session. And Tripti, as usual, has done a great job. Like she has become a veteran in this particular subject, teaching so many groups, and I'm very glad that she has improved, as well as she has been very clear in her exposition in this subject, and ably supported by Dr. Prem Kumar. And thank you one and all for logging in on this program, and I'm sure that we will have more exciting sessions in future. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. See you all tomorrow night.
Good night. Good night to you all.